Aloha, I'm Paul Drews. Welcome to another edition of PTC TV, brought to you by PTC'13 Platinum sponsor Equinix. This is the last of 5 programs specially created for PTC'13. If you'd like to watch any of the programs again, please visit the PTC website at ptc.org after the conference. Enjoy the show.
Hi, I'm Sharon Nakama, PTC CEO. I hope you have enjoyed your time in Honolulu and at PTC'13. Remember, PTC's mission extends well beyond our conferences. Learn more about our year-round activities and join us at ptc.org. Once again, mahalo for joining us this year. I look forward to seeing you at PTC'14 from January 19th through the 22nd. Ahui ho!
Would you like a quick and easy way to keep track of the conference program and schedule? Download the PTC'13 mobile app and favorite the sessions you'd like to attend. Learn about the PTC'13 sponsors and find out where the meeting suites are located. You can do all of this and more. Visit crwd.cc/PTC'13 on your mobile device or search for PTC'13 in the App Store.
Traffic has had some interesting impacts to the mobile ecosystem. First and foremost would be mobile network operators. For the longest time, mobile networks tended to be a single application network, and that was voice. This is very similar to the behavior we saw 14 years ago when public ISPs came together in our facilities in order to peer and localize the exchange of traffic with one another in order to make sure that the internet delivered a positive experience. We're now seeing the same thing from the mobile network operators. There's some interesting secondary effects to other members of the mobile ecosystem for very similar reasons. A good example would be social media platforms and advertising platforms that tend to co-locate next to one another in order to serve content as efficiently and quickly as possible. Another good example would be handset OEMs, who will tend to proxy things such as email and other types of popular content in order to make sure the end user has a positive experience.
Time now for the day's first keynote presentation by Tim Strong, Telegeography's VP of Research, and his topic is 2013 Telegeography Landscape.
Good morning, my name is Tim Strong, and I'd like to present some information about the telecommunications landscape, the telegeographic landscape across the world, if you will. I thought it would be a kind of a fun challenge to try to take the PTC'13 themes of capacity, capability, and collaboration and try to apply some measurements to those and to see how far we've come. Now, for collaboration, we're all in a free market. We don't do things generally for the fun of it, so I would say that that's more investment. Capacity, that's kind of easy to measure. We have some standard measurements in the industry. We can talk about how many minutes go between countries, or how many cell phone subscribers have, or what the fiber optic capacity is that connects various countries in the world. But what about capability? How do you measure that? Well, what does that even mean? That's kind of a fuzzy concept. I suspect that a lot of the conversation here at PTC this year has focused on carrier capability. What can service providers do? I'd kind of like to talk more generally about end users, how telecommunications has changed the capability of just regular people. And to measure that, I would propose that we look at prices. Capability really isn't so much whether a person has a cell phone, but can they afford to use that cell phone? How much does it cost to call abroad for an average family? How much is a normal business, how much do they have to pay to connect their various offices? And finally, when doing this exercise, I soon realized that doing a normal 5 or 7 year trend really wasn't going to work. It's to get a better perspective, you have to take a much longer view, and it's frankly a lot more fun. So I'd like to take a look more about a 100-year view of where our industry's come and where we may be going. So if you're willing to take a journey with me through the mists of time, let's move. I'd like to start in the year 1927. That was the year that voice communications across the Atlantic was possible. Before then, if you needed to reach someone If you were in the United States and you needed to reach someone in the United Kingdom, you had to telegraph. It was pure text. Beginning in 1927, voice communications via shortwave radio transmissions were introduced. But it wasn't too cheap. The cost of a voice call across the Atlantic was $75 for a 3-minute call. In today's terms, that's about $1,000. So that was, you could make a voice call, but it was the preserve of the very rich, governments, businesses, and the great Gatsbys of the world. Those are the people who'd be making these voice calls. Well, things progressed in the coming few decades. Beginning in the 1950s, it was possible to use a cable across the Atlantic for voice. And in 1964, Bell Telephone Systems, aka AT&T, put out this advertisement, trying to encourage people, end users, to pick up their telephone and make that phone call, because it's possible. Bell was bragging about how much cheaper it was to call in 1964 to 1927. I'm not sure if you can read the fine point, but it was making that point. It's so much cheaper now. In fact, it was only $2.50 per hour. Think of how advanced we are in 1964 compared to those poor rubes in 1920s. Well, if adjusted for inflation, the cost of a $2.50 per minute call would be about $90. So again, for normal people, that's simply not going to happen. We had the capacity to make these calls. We had the ability, but not really the capability for end users. So if you're thinking in your head like I did when I saw those statistics, I figured, well, if I really need to reach someone, I'll just go back to the old technology of telegrams. Text is a lot more efficient, a lot cheaper. This is not a real telegram. It's something I just made up for this presentation. But it reads, if you don't mind, I'll read it to you. This is the average length of an international telegram in 1980. 47.5 words per message. Back then, a telegram cost on average 20 cents per word. This baby would have cost over $24 adjusted for inflation. All in all, I would rather text or email. Lol. 47 words plus lol, which is really only half a word. So that's 47.5 words a minute per message. In other words, you're paying about $24 for 2 tweets. That's pretty steep. So the capability still wasn't really there for intense international communications. Now, if you don't mind getting sidetracked for a moment, this next slide is an aside. It doesn't really promote my points at all. I just thought it was too cool not to share. It's an image of what might have been the costliest telegram ever in the history of humanity. I don't know if any of you are history buffs and can guess what this is, but a few hints. One, if the timestamp, the date stamp on the upper right is 1917. The destination is over on the upper left. That's to the German legation in Mexico City. This is the famous Zimmermann telegram sent by the Foreign Secretary of the German Empire, Zimmermann, to his ambassador to Mexico. And it was instructing him that all the numbers are encoded. It was instructing him that to tell the Mexican government that Germany was anticipating having to go to war against the United States quite soon, and it was inviting Mexico to join in the cause. Anyone here from the states of Texas? Any Texans? New Mexico, Arizona? Okay, we got a few people. You may be interested to know that one of the things that was offered in this telegram was back to Mexico recovery of the territories of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. I don't know if any of you have accidentally hit forward on an email when you meant to hit reply and it went to the wrong person. Well, this was intercepted by British intelligence, handed to the American government, which in turn leaked it to the American people. It made it far easier to justify a declaration of war against Germany. So in essence, you may think a $24 per message telegram is quite expensive, but this telegram may well have served to put the final nail in the coffin of the German Empire. So back to voice. Remember the slide from a moment ago from 1964 from AT&T encouraging people to make phone calls. Well, that campaign continued. This is from the 1970s. Many of you probably remember, many Americans here remember the Reach Out and Touch Someone campaign. This is sort of in that same theme. This was this is a still from a local television ad. And if any of you are American college football fans, you may recognize the celebrity endorser that AT&T had. That's the legendary coach Paul Bear Bryant of the University of Alabama football team. And in this 30-second TV ad, which ran in Alabama, and I'm showing this because it's personal to me. I remember this. I was a boy in the 1970s in Alabama. I certainly remember this ad. He basically was extolling the importance of making use of our communications devices. He explained at the beginning of the ad that the very first thing he does when his players come in from high school is he makes, as freshmen in college, he makes them sit down and write a postcard to their mothers and fathers at home. And at the end of the 30-second ad, Bear Bryant turns to the audience and he says, and by the way, his mother had passed away some years earlier, he challenges the audience. He says, "Have you called your mama? I sure wish I could call mine." Well, I guarantee you, if you go to Alabama and ask men especially of the age of 40 and above, if they remember this ad, many of them will. It really touches on many of the cornerstones of what it means to be a Southern man, all the things you love. Country, it's almost a patriotic duty to call. You touch on country, God, college football, and mama. So yes, the ad is a little quaint in modern terms, but it's also a little odd if you think about it. When is the last time you've seen an advertisement from your broadband ISP asking you to download more stuff? Or your mobile operator to, hey, make more calls on our network? It's sort of funny to look back on this because in today's age, so many times you hear carriers complaining about people using their services. They're clogging up our network. Oh, that Google, they're piggybacking on us too much and encouraging people to use our network too much. Well, things were a little different. There are a couple of major differences in the way things are structured today than back then. One, today, there are competitive carriers, and so you try to compete for subscribers. Back then, there was a monopoly. And secondly, the monopolies could try to exercise monopoly and encourage the maximization of their network because voice calls were charged still per minute, and like they are often still today, but very expensive, as we've seen. So even though we were able to make calls, our capabilities still really weren't there to call intensively. It was still very expensive. Well, soon after this, things really began to change. Voice service prices really fell for three major reasons. One, probably most important reason, not just in the United States, but all over the world, is deregulation. Secondly, there were cost declines that happened due to technological change. And third, perhaps least important, but this is what I want to focus on for the rest of this presentation, capacity changed. This is a table that shows the capacity of submarine cables across the Atlantic in today's terms, in outmoded terms of voice circuits, or 64 kilobit per second circuit equivalents. This is how we planned cables up until through the 80s and into the mid-90s, and now we think of things in terms of gigabits or terabits per second, but these are in voice circuit equivalents. The very first across the Atlantic, 1956, TAT1, 48 simultaneous voice circuits. Not too bad. That's 4 dozen conversations. It's pretty good. It's better than using that shortwave radio. TAT8, the first fiber optic cable across the Atlantic, about 7,500 voice circuit equivalents. Now, AC1, that's the first, or one of the first private fiber optic systems, not the first across the Atlantic, but it's arguably the one that started the bandwidth boom craze. Almost 500,000 circuits. And today, if you look at how much lit capacity there is on fiber optic cables, all the different cables across the Atlantic, it's roughly the equivalent of 333 million. So capacity has happened. And really, a theme that I'd like to come back to is collaboration and capacity and capability. Collaboration or investment. That happened when people identified problems with capability. Things were expensive to get across the Atlantic, and they had new technology to connect. Capacity comes from investment. And finally, capability or cheaper prices come from new capacity. That certainly is what's happened on the fiber optic market across the Atlantic. International bandwidth prices have really fallen. If you look all the way over on the left, you can see what the price for an IRU for an STM1 circuit, 155 megabit per second circuit, was in 1997, $16 million. So imagine getting that revenue from selling one circuit. So that was the kind of price that allowed Global Crossing, reportedly, to be able to maintain for a brief period of time a fleet of 5 jets and supposedly a Picasso in the office. And in fact, Global Crossing, many of you remember, had an office in Beverly Hills. I think that's rather telling because when this bandwidth boom happened, it's like every other Jed Clampett in Texas wanted to move out west, build them a cable, and get a home with where they could swim in the cement pond. And you see what happens when Jed Clampetts, about a dozen Jed Clampetts, get their funding from banks. They build their cables, prices have plunged. It's plunged so severely that I had to do 2 charts. One is the absolute scale on the left, one is a logarithmic scale on the right. So you see prices have changed. Has there ever been a price drop in the history of mankind that happened so fast and so violently for a major product? There may have been, but I'm not aware of it. Capacity changed and capabilities changed as well. So as fiber optic capacity prices fell, so too did voice prices. That's what is being tracked in this chart. So the price per minute of international calls up from the United States beginning in 1965. And this is unadjusted for inflation, by the way, so if I adjusted it, it would be a far more dramatic decline. Still over $3 per minute in 1965, and it fell quite rapidly for many years, especially in the 80s and then again in the late 1990s. The funny thing that's happened is as prices have fallen, demand or traffic has greatly increased. In 1980, between the United States and China, there were 840,000 minutes per year. Now, last year, there were 6.3 billion minutes. Part of that is political. There's more intense communications and migration between China and the U.S., but really it's enabled because of the prices. In Mexico, calling from the United States to Mexico in 1980, about 179 million minutes of traffic. In last year, 23 billion minutes of traffic. And it's not just volumes have changed, but the way we behave has changed. Back even as late as 1980, voice calling was still the preserve of the rich or the people who really needed to communicate. Multinational corporations were something that were really special, really big. But many of you, I certainly am, are part of a small company that's a multinational corporation. And it's the only way we're able to make this work is because of cheap communications. One of our workers married a Slovak girl, and he now lives in Bratislava and manages people from our D.C. office from there. I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains area of Maryland, and I work from home 3 days a week. And it's enabled because of cheaper communications at the end-user level. So our capabilities have changed. Going back to the idea of identifying opportunities for investment, for new capacity, the AC1 cable really helped usher in a new era in which lots and lots of countries around the world received fiber optic capacity. By 1998, most of developed markets in the world had at least one cable. The countries on this map marked in red were ones that did not have fiber optic capacity. So back then, if you had some money to invest, you wanted to build a cable, it's pretty easy to identify those opportunities. You pointed to a place in red, you said, I'm going to build a cable there, and you can make it happen. This is the map today. These in red are the countries that do not have fiber optic connectivity. Pretty much the whole world has been painted gray. Most of these countries in gray have access to 3 or more cables. Some don't, but many do. So where are these opportunities where countries don't have access to a fiber optic cable? Well, there you go. This is the list, as far as I'm aware. Anyone want to build a cable to North Korea? No? Well, I've got one volunteer. Pretty brave. My understanding is that there are cables that go by Somalia, but unless I'm mistaken, none have yet dropped in Somalia due to security concerns. But if you go down the list, the number of countries with sizable populations are not really there. Most of these countries are islands, or very small populations, and remote and expensive. Yet even so, some of these countries will get access to a new submarine cable quite soon. Those are marked with asterisks. And there may be more in the works that I'm simply not aware of. So it's not as easy now to identify problems with capacity, problems with do they have connections or not. That's more at the wholesale level. What about what's happening at the end user level? This is a map of wireless penetration. It's a shaded map. Gray in this one is bad, and blue is good. Blue means that there's plenty of mobile or wireless penetration in a country. Look how much blue is on this map. This is from as of the Q4 2012. It's really incredible. And just 15 or even 10 years ago, who would have predicted that Latin America would have as much mobile penetration as North America, or North Africa would have similar mobile penetration to Western Europe? The gains that we've had as a society are pretty incredible. Fixed broadband penetration is a bit of a different story, but even so, there have been impressive gains there. So far, I've kind of painted a rosy picture. We've had a lot of investment. Our capacity all around the world has increased, and our capabilities have changed as just regular humans, as average people. But the gains have not been universal. If you start looking at the capability side of things, that is, of prices, the facade begins to crack a little bit. Cheap bandwidth is not universal. That's one thing that we found, and that remains so today. These are prices for a 10 gigabit per second wavelength circuit, which across the Atlantic and many parts of the world are generally parceled out as annual leases. This is the cost of a monthly charge on an annual lease. And you can see all the way over on the left, the prices that we saw earlier, London to New York capacity. Well, Trans-Pacific capacity is also fairly cheap, and it's going down. It has gone down even further beyond what we've seen here. Not so all across the world. Miami, Sao Paulo, still very expensive compared to Trans-Pacific. The Europe to Asia prices, those prices are under a lot of pressure, but even so, those are very expensive too. But again, that's more at the carrier level. How does that translate down to us as end users, as families calling or businesses looking to get connected? Well, this is what the businesses must pay to connect their offices through an IP virtual private network. And this is a monthly port price in a city in a country for a T1 or E1 size, so fairly small size. New York, London, Paris, virtually identical. Prices are pretty uniform there. Even Moscow now, they're approaching Western European prices. Sao Paulo, too, not too bad. Move to Beijing, it's getting kind of expensive. Jakarta, certainly expensive. And there are some places of the world where it's prohibitive still to connect via VPN. Our capabilities are not the same all across the world. So to conclude, I think there are a few lessons we've had from our 100-year history. One is that, yes, our capacities have changed. Our capabilities have changed too. The telecom network build-out has yielded amazing progress. Families can call loved ones now, whereas before they wouldn't probably have talked until they could visit abroad. Businesses can move abroad and still communicate with each other. Internet access is increasingly ubiquitous. And how did we do this? It's through investment, and the problem that you often hear is that we're a victim of our own success in the telecom industry. We've built so much, margins are low, and people seem frustrated that we're at a point where we're failing. But I would argue that's not a failure, that's a success. That's how the free market is supposed to do. You're supposed to, investment will draw down profits, and then people will benefit. That's certainly what we've seen. So the challenging of wiring nations to each other is basically over. Virtually every country with a significant population now has a fiber optic connection. The challenge of building in competition on those networks and sufficient diversity for those networks is not over. That continues. So, in other words, distance still matters. Where you're located in the world can have an effect on your capability. Price differences do persist in different parts of the world. And finally, I want to conclude with the thought that even if we're able to have uniformly low prices all across the world, even so, the measure of what it means to be connected, of what it means to have capability, continues to evolve. I'd like to leave you with this slide. This slide is showing 3 different services and their international service revenues of those services from the United States compared to each other. The blue line is showing telegraph services, how much international revenues depended on telegraph over time, beginning in 1950, ending in the year 2000. The red is showing voice, green telex. Telex is kind of interesting because it looked like a promising technology, and that was taken over largely likely because of the advent of consumer-grade fax machines. And voice has increased. But if you think about telegraph, in 1911, the British Committee on Imperial Defense had a report, a study of the All Red Line, the series of telegraphs that connected the United Kingdom with the rest of the British Empire. It talked about how many networks there were and how many telegraphs connected the empire, and made the claim that there were so many redundancies built into the system that it would take 49 cuts to isolate the United Kingdom. They were justifiably proud of the telecommunications system they had built. Just like today, if you do a security review of fiber optic connections connecting to Eastern Europe or to Western Europe, Asia, and North America, we can also be proud of what there is, what we've accomplished. But as Darth Vader told that one guy he was about to choke in the Death Star, don't be too proud of the technological terror you've constructed, because what is sufficient today is no longer sufficient tomorrow. Certainly no one is using telegraphs today. So 20 years from now, we may look back on fondness of what we were proud of in the year 2013, just like we look back on fondness from those Bear Bryant advertisements from the 1970s, or how people in 1964 did on what happened in 1927. 20 years from now, who knows, you may have a famous sporting coach come on your whatever video screen you're using and challenge you by saying, have you engaged in a 3D hologram with your mama? I sure wish I could hologram with mine. Thank you, and roll Tide.
up and go now.
PTC'13 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC'13 sponsors. Mahalo to the PTC'13 Diamond sponsors. Thank you for all of your support. PTC TV is brought to you by PTC'13 Platinum sponsor Equinix. Mahalo Equinix. Thank you for supporting PTC TV. Time now for another keynote presentation. Robert Pepper, Cisco's VP of Global Technology Policy, talks to us about broadband everywhere and networks fit for purpose.
So, given the theme of capacity, capability, and collaboration, what I'm going to do, I'll talk about the policy piece of this sort of at the end, but what I'm going to do is talk about what kind of networks do we need to provide the capability for collaboration, cloud services. I actually have been playing with the presentation given the conversations and presentations and keynotes and discussions and panels and roundtables over the last week, which I think have been absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to talk about trends in global broadband demand, and you will have seen some of this, but there's some new stuff as well. Then I want to talk about what I call networks fit for purpose. What are the networks that we need, and what are the network capabilities to have collaboration? And a lot of that is the cloud-based. And what kinds of networks do we need for cloud services? And that becomes a really important variable. And then what are some of the policies that we're seeing? So many of you, I would hope, most of you, have seen and even played with our Visual Networking Index data, which is our 5-year rolling forecast of data over global, mobile, and then also our cloud studies. And, just to put things in context, our 2012 forecast, which forecasts out to 2016, forecasts that by 2016 in the global internet, the run rate will be about 1.3 zettabytes per year. To put that in perspective, if you add up all of the data traffic for the history of the internet through this year, or through last year, that was only about 1.2 zettabytes. And what we're forecasting is that in 2016, in that 1 year, there'll be more traffic across the global internet in 2016 than in the entire history of the internet from its beginning through 2012. In terms of the average internet user, what does that mean? What we saw, actually looking at this, was for the average user consuming about 11.5 gigabytes per month. We're forecasting by 2016 32 gigabytes. By the way, and then off in the future 75. This is per user. In Japan, in 2016, we're forecasting approximately 46 gigabytes. For the average household, what we saw was about 26 gigabytes in 2011, forecasting 84. In Japan, we're forecasting 96. And the gap, by the way, between Japan and Korea, the two leading, we're here in the Pacific Telecommunications Council meeting, so focusing a little bit on the region. Japan and Korea have the two most broadband networks on average in the world. And you take a look at the gap between what's in Japan and Korea today versus the rest of the world. The average is it's quite wide, but based upon what Tim was talking about, we're seeing that narrow as we see more fiber everywhere. Now, the question I always ask in terms of these forecasts, that's nice. Cisco likes big numbers. You sell more boxes with blinking lights, more routers and switches. Well, we actually go back and we actually look at the data, right? How reliable are the data? Well, it turns out, because we've been doing this long enough, we can go back and look at a forecast and look what actually happened. We're within about 10% on the conservative side. So what we've seen is that actually we're more conservative than what the market has actually driven in terms of data consumption. And this is very consistent with the telegeography data that Tim showed. What's driving it? Video is the short answer. And what we're forecasting is that by 2016, more than half of the traffic is going to be video, but video doesn't mean just traditional television. It's all forms of video. So it's linear, it's YouTube, short form, it's telepresence, super high definition video collaboration, it's Skype video, it's FaceTime on your iPhone and iPad, but it's video in all of its aspects. But it's not just, the fact that, there really are 4 drivers for this increasing demand. There are more people who are going to be connected. There are more devices that are going to be connected. And those devices are going to be more robust. Third, there are going to be more applications that are media rich. And fourth, the network capabilities are going to interact with the other first 3 variables. And this is going to drive this really dramatic growth in data consumption. In terms of devices, we're forecasting, and this is not including all of the Internet of Things sensors and sensor networks. These are really more so the devices that people use or are involved with. And these could be devices in your car. But we're looking at, by 2016, forecasting approximately 20 billion network connections, and this is how they're distributed across the world. And what you see is that by 2016, half of the devices connected to the global internet we are forecasting will be in this region, the Asia-Pacific region. And so we're seeing a major shift historically, and again, I love Tim's data, and by the way, the telegeography map that they have looks at this also over time, that there's a shift in terms of internet connections, people, users, and traffic from what had historically been North America and Europe to emerging countries in the South and across the Asia-Pacific region. The types of devices that are being connected are changing. It used to be desktops and now laptops. And this, by the way, is not number of devices. The slide that you see is the amount of traffic that is being generated across the global nets coming from different types of devices. And what you see is that in 2011, 56%, 58% of the traffic was coming from laptops and netbooks. And about a quarter, 26, 27% coming from smartphones. What we're forecasting is that by 2016, that's going to flip. That smartphones will generate about half of all of the traffic across the global net. Now, what that doesn't take into account, because the forecast was at 2012, and we look back at real data in 2011 and forecasted 2016, tablets, and how tablets and the category between tablets and smartphones is blurring with the 7-inch, 8-inch tablet. Is that a phone or a tablet, right? So, and this is a dynamic model, and so I'm going to be really interested to see how that affects things. But we're seeing a very significant shift from the traditional form factors of laptops to smartphones and tablets, and these are the devices people are using to connect to the internet and consume the data and the applications, which is primarily going to be video-based. Let's talk about cloud. We have a new study that's now only 2 years old, based upon the same data and models, which we call our Global Cloud Index. And we look at cloud, we look at cloud applications, data center, the traffic within data center, between data center, and then to users of data center and cloud services. And we then take a look at networks and network capabilities, and using speed test data from a variety of sources, a sample of over 45 million tests from over 150 countries. And what we see in terms of the amount of data, and we're talking about terabytes and multiple zettabytes of data, we're looking at, and what we're seeing is that about 3/4 of the traffic is within data center, 7% data center to data center, and about 17% of data center traffic is to the user. It's back and forth to the users. And then you look at traditional data center and cloud, and what we see is the shift between traditional data center applications and uses in the enterprise and looking at how cloud services based in data center are now going to be 2/3 of the traffic in and out of data center. And these are all of the cloud services that we were hearing about this week. And you look at the compounded annual growth rate of cloud services, the personal content, Amazon Cloud, Google Cloud, Microsoft Cloud, etc. Look at, Dropbox, Google Drive, Apple's iCloud. And we're looking at globally over 100% compounded annual growth rate and a 42-fold increase in cloud traffic between 2011 and 2016. And then you couple that with what we're seeing, and this makes complete sense if you realize that most of the applications people are using are video, and most of that video is residing in the cloud. Even on mobile networks, we see that a shift where we're forecasting that cloud will account for 71% of mobile data by 2016, and that has huge implications for mobile operators, the wireless networks. And one of the trends that we see is because of that, plus the investments needed, plus the way spectrum is allocated, is we see a trend towards the heterogeneous network. The majority of people will be connected to the net, to their broadband, using macro cell for outdoor, small cell, femto, but mostly Wi-Fi indoor, and for short-range outdoor. And it all has to be aggregated into fiber. T1s, E1s doesn't cut it. If you think about the backhaul needed from your wireless base station, whether it's your Wi-Fi base station at home or office or here in the hotel, and we know the constraints here, right? Or the base station, which is the antenna on top of the cell tower, if we're going to be able to support the bandwidth needed to provide the applications, it's all going to have to aggregate into fiber. So the future is the heterogeneous network. Macro cell, small cell, fiber aggregation. And 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when I would say that, or I'd be having conversations with service providers, many of the people in this room, the answer was, you're crazy. Wi-Fi is a toy. Wi-Fi is not secure. Wi-Fi, right? It's a competitor. And as you all know, that has been turned on its head. Virtually every wireless operator, and I consciously say wireless operator, not just mobile operator, in the world is looking at small cell to complement macro cell. And you even have cable operators in the US and elsewhere looking at Wi-Fi outdoors, hanging on their cables for small cell Wi-Fi connections to the device. Those 19 billion devices are going to be connected not with Ethernet, but with radio. So what kinds of networks do we need for cloud? Well, in doing our cloud study, we had to ask a very fundamental question. What do we mean by cloud services? And so we've come up with a framework, very simple, maybe oversimplified, for basic cloud, intermediate cloud, and advanced cloud services. And then we took, and I'll define some of these with some examples. And then we took a look at what kind of network is needed to support a single basic, intermediate, and advanced cloud application. And when we look at advanced, so basic doesn't require much. It's 750 kilobits down, 250 kilobits up. And by the way, in some parts of the world and this region, you can't even do that. Latency is not a big deal. You can deal with 160 millisecond delay or greater. For intermediate cloud, it's going to require roughly 1 meg to 2.5 meg down, 250K up, a meg up, and latency between 100 milliseconds to 160 milliseconds. Advanced cloud applications are going to require higher speed down, more than 2.5 meg down, at least a meg up, but latency of less than 100 milliseconds. And this becomes really important. But most advanced cloud applications are not single applications. They are multiple applications. Even something like a WebEx meeting or a net meeting, right? There's video, there's sharing of files, there's voice, there's multiple things going on. And so actually we've looked at cloud readiness with concurrent applications. The latency variable doesn't shift, but the bandwidth requirements do. And if you really want to be providing advanced cloud services, so let's take a look at what that might mean, including things like high-definition industrial design and collaboration, right? Because we're talking about the benefits of broadband and IT and ICT that increase productivity. And we're looking at, this is not just about people downloading movies and watching YouTube movies or uploading YouTube movies, but it's also about collaboration, it's about design, industrial design, supply chain management, all kinds of productivity-enhancing activities in the business world, in the healthcare world, medical applications, education, government services, and the like. Those are going to require advanced cloud applications. Latency matters. Just think about it in a very common sense way. If I'm sitting in a design lab in San Jose and I have a colleague who I'm working with in Singapore who's working with another colleague in our R&D center in Shanghai, and we're designing something together, and we're doing schematics, or we're designing, if it's industrial design, an aircraft engine, and we're working in real time, it has to be real time. If I'm making a change and you make a change and they somehow, because of the latency in the network, cross in cyberspace, it's not going to work. It has to be as though we're working together on the same machine. And to do that, you need latency of less than 100 milliseconds. Those are the applications that are going to make a difference going forward. These are the kinds of networks that we're going to need to support that and support those kinds of intermediate and advanced applications. And the intermediate concurrent applications are going to require 7 meg down, 2.5 up, right? And the advanced applications over 20 meg down and 9 meg up in less than 100 milliseconds. So let's look at countries in this region. And what you can see here is that in orange are the countries in this region, the Pacific Rim countries. And you can see the average upload speed on the vertical axis and the average download on the x-axis and the plots, and you can see where countries are. And then let's take a look if we add, this is the fixed networks, let's add latency. And what you can see is that on the fixed networks, there are many countries in this region that actually can support at least some advanced cloud applications concurrently, individually, yes. But so, and if you take a look at the countries that have high bandwidth, upload, download, and low latency, it shouldn't be a surprise: Singapore, Japan, Korea, Hong Kong. But there's a whole bunch of smaller countries down here that on their fixed networks cannot even support intermediate cloud services. This is fixed. Now let's take a look at mobile. Again, here are the countries globally, Pacific Rim countries in orange. And you can take a look and you can see the plot of download, upload. Now let's add latency. Only 3 countries in the region not surprisingly, Hong Kong, Japan, and Singapore can support mobile, wireless, supported advanced cloud services. The biggest variable is not bandwidth. The biggest variable is not the capacity of download, upload. The biggest variable is latency. And on the wireless networks, the heterogeneous network, what this means is that until we have LTE, 4G, we're not going to bring the latency down. And we're not going to be able to support those kinds of advanced cloud applications for collaboration. So, what kind of network do we need, and what are some of the policies? And I'm only going to very briefly just highlight this with two very quick slides. There's a study that we're doing looking at national broadband plans globally, and we've come up with a framework that looks at both supply side and demand side. And our conclusion in looking at all of these broadband plans globally, and we're doing this in conjunction with the World Economic Forum, and they'll be published in April in the Global Information Technology Report. And we're also working with the UN Broadband Commission on this, that you need a balance of supply and demand to nationally drive the economic as well as policy and technical ecosystems to get the kinds of networks that you're going to need to support these advanced applications. So in conclusion, what are the networks that we need fit for purpose? Number one, we see that there are going to be more people, more connections, more devices, and that's leading to exploding demand. Second, most devices are going to be connected with radio. They're going to be wireless. They're not going to be Ethernet connected. That's the heterogeneous network. So we need to think about spectrum. We need to think about the types of spectrum and the types of networks. And what that is leading me to, again, is the need for spectrum, more spectrum for macro cell LTE 4G, and more spectrum for unlicensed Wi-Fi indoors. 802.11.AC and so on. Third, demand is driving applications in the cloud, and a lot of that is video. It's cloud services in business as well, and it's the advanced cloud applications. And advanced cloud applications need high speed, symmetric, and low latency. The question for companies and countries and policy, is your network ready and fit for cloud and collaboration? Good question. Thank you very much.
Now more than ever, broadband is life. It's the modern heartbeat that connects our world. And like our own heartbeat, we take it for granted that it'll always be there, until the day it's not. Too much is at stake for businesses to rely upon old technologies trying to catch up with today's broadband explosion. Ciena is different. We expected the inevitable and designed fiber optic networks that could handle it. The Ciena GeoMesh unifies terrestrial and submarine networks like never before. It's intelligent, self-aware, and self-healing. When submarine cables get cut or terrestrial links are damaged, the system automatically reroutes communications in milliseconds. So if Ciena's GeoMesh can keep connectivity working at the worst of times, just imagine how well it performs at the best of times. With demand for broadband increasing by 40% a year and submarine cables quickly approaching terabit carrying capacities, businesses need global networks they can trust to handle their skyrocketing challenges. Our streamlined network delivers faster speeds, reduced latency, and fewer points of connectivity to manage and worry about. It all adds up to improved performance, lower operating costs, and greater cooperation. It's no wonder that Ciena has become a dominant player in the submarine network market in just a few years. And when you consider that a submarine cable is severed once every 3 days, or that a terrestrial cable is damaged every 30 minutes, an intelligent, self-healing network is critical. However, the greatest threat isn't a natural or man-made disaster. It's becoming one of these guys, being left behind because demand outstripped performance. Broadband is life. Make sure you have the most innovative network, the smartest people, and the most advanced technology working for you. Sienna's GeoMesh. Undersea, over land, networks unite.
PTC'13 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC'13 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC'13 Platinum sponsors. Thank you for all of your support. Are you plugged into social media? Then join the conversation online. Follow PT Council on Twitter and use the PTC'13 hashtag #PTC'13. You can also like Pacific Telecommunications Council on Facebook. PTC'13 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC'13 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC'13 Gold sponsors. Thank you for all of your support. Time now for our last keynote panel. Final topic is technology and investments.
So let's talk about investments. I know that there's a couple of ways of framing the discussion, and I think each one of us might be able to bring a different aspect of it to the table. I'm based in Silicon Valley, so I see a lot of what the venture capitalists are investing in. Each of you has a different viewpoint as well. I think, Joe, you see a fair bit of the VC activity. And Jonathan, you bring in kind of Wall Street and what institutional investors are looking at. So maybe not the ventures, but what large companies and large investment areas are attracting investment. Why don't we let you guys introduce yourselves, frame a bit about where you're coming from, I guess, with respect to looking at investments in telecommunications. And if you'd like, you can integrate your overhead elements as well at this point. Joe, who was first and who was second in the overhead aspects?
Yeah, so are there slides or?
I believe they're queuing up slides, so if you'd like to use them.
Yeah.
I think they're right there.
So I'll step up there real quick.
So Jonathan's slides first.
So my name's John Atkin. Just to have two slides to present, basically. I'm based in San Francisco, work at RBC Capital Markets. My focus is telecom services, and that includes the carriers. So that would include satellite companies, mobile operators, fixed line operators, and an area that I would characterize as broadband infrastructure. So tower infrastructure, and that increasingly is focusing to varying degrees on small cells, which has come up in numerous forums, including the last one and a couple yesterday that I noticed. And then IP infrastructure, which would be data centers, where there's been massive investment given the amount of capital required to build a new data center, as well as moving further up the stack into web hosting, cloud services, and the like. So I cover kind of all of the above, mostly U.S. listed companies, but a couple that are domiciled in Europe, and then quite a number that are active in Asia Pac. So in a nutshell, the operating trends and also my own investment picks tend to favor the broadband infrastructure players over the actual carriers, and what data centers, hosting, and some of the mobile infrastructure plays like towers and distributed antenna systems and small cells all have in common is that they're technology neutral, they're application neutral, and they all benefit from some of the trends around data usage that Cisco's done a very good job of quantifying and forecasting. And as it pertains to most of these companies, there still is a very favorable demand-supply imbalance. There are some exceptions by region, by city, and so forth, but that has kept pricing trends quite healthy for the most part. And then, not to get too deep into the weeds, but some of these companies, American Tower would be an example, and CyrusOne and Equinix are other examples of companies that are recently converted or are converting to real estate investment trusts, and that introduces a new investor base that can own these stocks and is often quite helpful for the stock performance and the valuation. Asia Pac is definitely the region where we see the fastest growth, some of the most active investment, and also the highest pricing for operators that are already in some of the established markets. So let me just kind of, for the sake of brevity, move on to the next and final slide, really. Some quick observations that I'll throw out there just to kind of stir up the pot around M&A and financing and so forth. And last year, if you look at the top M&A deals in the overall economy, not just tech, but carriers kind of dominated them. And I listed these: SoftBank, Sprint Clearwire, T-Mobile, Metro, PCS. And then further down, but still I think a $2 billion transaction with Zayo AboveNet on the Metro fiber side. So telecom, an area that kind of dominated or had a very leading role in the M&A landscape. A lot of the other transactions that we've seen have been carriers acquiring data center assets, usually with an idea of offering not just co-location, but managed services and hosting. So I've listed a few examples there from the last few years. And then there's been other either investments or M&A transactions, joint venture arrangements that have been entered into with an eye towards geographic expansion. And so I've listed examples here: Equinix, Telecity, Digital Realty Trust is another example that I left off the slide. Financing has been quite active, particularly in the data center space, given how capital intensive this sector is. Some have gone public. Just last week, CyrusOne completed their roadshow, and I think they priced or started trading earlier this week. And then you've got a number of private operators that have done substantial financings in the private equity market or in the debt markets, amongst them Global Switch and Telex and SoftLayer. Cross-region, what we're seeing is a lot of investment from the U.S. to emerging markets, principally Asia Pac and South America, where Brazil would be probably the number one target. A lot of this is driven by the need for cloud providers to provide lower latency to their end users and therefore a better experience. And then you often have U.S.-based multinationals that are customers of companies like Digital Realty Trust or Equinix or others, where they want to establish a foothold with an existing vendor in Asia. Often Singapore is the first choice, and Hong Kong is not far behind in terms of where the U.S.-based companies tend to want to locate, and hence where a lot of the data center construction is taking place. And then Asia to U.S. in the other direction, what I'm noticing based in just north of Silicon Valley is a lot of demand on the part of Asian telcos to establish a presence on behalf of their customers, whether it's a gaming company or a cloud computing company. They'll come in under the rubric of an NTT or a China Telecom or a China Unicom and establish a foothold initially on the U.S. West Coast and then elsewhere. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joe.
Great. Thank you. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks. Coming from IBM, we look at the marketplace and look at technology and investments across a broad spectrum of domains. And fundamentally, we start with looking at the infrastructure or the operating environment, move into the platforms, and as they're evolving into the services and applications. And as we look at that, we are constantly looking at what are the opportunities for us and the threats to our ability to deliver value or create value for our customers, the enterprises of the world. And as we look at this, we see more and more that networks, compute, storage at the core infrastructure need to be in turn enabled with investment through looking at the services that people are consuming and the way they're consuming. We hear a lot about mobile, social, analytics, cloud, data, and the promise that brings and how that's really changing the game. So when we look and spend a lot of time at thinking about where the money is going as well as where the technology is likely to head. So if we think about it from IBM, we look at the macro trends, truly what is happening and is shaping where the money is going to be flowing, where spend is going to happen. And as we've looked at over the last 20, 30 years, what we have seen is kind of a real shift relative to the percent of GDP that is being spent on IT. And this comes at, you have to get down below a lot of the numbers to recognize that a lot of it has to do with, the constructs around Moore's Law and that, it's better, faster, cheaper. We constantly are improving our ability to deliver a certain price performance each year to the point where the companies in the industry have to sell more and more technology, more and more capacity, more and more capabilities every year in order to remain flat. So what we see is this kind of levels out, and we've seen sort of the adoption curve play out here where there's a lot of money being spent on automation. Then through the Y2K bubble that we saw a tremendous amount of money being spent as a percent of GDP to address that issue, to then some disillusionment, and now into kind of a stage where we see not just the percent of GDP being kind of leveling out as far as what IT spend is, but also the kind of the mix between the growth markets, the higher growth markets and the more mature markets, the Western Europe, the US and Japan versus the markets like Canada or like China and India, Africa, Latin America, where the growth rates are much higher. But what we see is the dynamic kind of plays out that, hey, what we're going to see is a trend towards moderating around or kind of coalescing around GDP growth for the IT industry, where we're going to see that instead of growing at multiples of GDP, we're going to be seeing that it's going to grow at or a little below GDP going forward, even taking into consideration the mix between the market spend in the growth markets ever growing at much faster rates. The percent of GDP in those markets is spent on IT is much less. We look at the VCs as well. So we look at the macro trends, and then we try and look and see what is going on in the venture community to see what's coming next. And these are ones that we see playing out, and I think is fairly consistent with what Derek sees and other players in the VC community. But it is around this construct of looking at the world's becoming more instrumented, it's becoming more interconnected, and it's becoming more intelligent. The construct that we call Smarter Planet. There's really an observation of what is occurring. So as we see this, plays where cities are trying to serve their constituency and position themselves in the global market relative to being able to attract capital, improve quality of life, and operate efficiently. We look at it from the perspective of the opening up and having to drive from an enterprise perspective as well, and from both the B2E or B2 within the enterprise, as well as looking out to the way you serve your customers, so how enterprises serve their customers, being able to to deal with a wide spectrum of different technologies. And then we look at it as social is really impacting the way we play or the way we reach out and touch our customers. The construct around being able to collaborate differently, being able to have a direct connection that is always on or 24/7 with your customer, to be able to drive insight around all the data that is connecting or that is created through these interactions becomes critical. Mobile is a prime driver of all of this as it plays out, as mobile is enabling us to have those relationships. It's enabling us to collect and generate the data that we can in turn drive insights. So we see, we look at the trends that are going on in the VC community. We scout heavily in the Valley as well as in other markets. We see the trend relative to the investments, while still dominated in the U.S. and in the Valley, is kind of changing. There is more investments around, in given markets in India and China that we see really coming up, but it's still kind of very much a U.S.-based view. And then we kind of look at this, what is happening from a technology perspective. And the whole thought is as we've looked at history, is from basically calculators or tabulation machines up through the thought of being very much the idea that we can run our businesses and automate processes and be much more efficient and global in the way we run our businesses, to this thought of we need to have a different construct around how we solve problems of the future. The whole construct of how we think about the problems, if we go to and think about how we're going to solve the future problems relative to the amount of data that's being generated, the amount of connectivity that is being enabled, we need to change the paradigm. The amount of compute that will be required to do and solve some of the problems requires us to think differently about those problems. And we talk a lot about cognitive computing, and we have this program around Watson that many of you have heard about in the U.S. We put up against the Jeopardy champions, where it's very much a deterministic, sort of a very intelligent way to look at problems and come up based on a corpus, a set of evidence being built around that, and learning that can help make decisions in a far more efficient, more effective way with a higher level of confidence. So as we see all this playing out, we see investments being made in various different ways, and as we talk about the whole approach of storage, compute, and network coming together, it's no longer thinking about data centers in the traditional way or compute in the traditional way. It all kind of plays together.
All right, great. Let's do a little Q&A and talk about some of these subject matters. My first question I'm curious about is, way back we would have things like Bell Labs doing a lot of the heavy metal innovation and invention about telecom technologies, and one of the criticisms that I hear in Silicon Valley, and I think is unfounded, but I hear people say, we're not investing in big things anymore, we're not investing in infrastructure anymore, and I think it's just that they're blind to the fact that we're distracted by investments in Twitters and in social network startups and things like that, because that's what's happening in that region around us. But it's not to say this big iron investments aren't taking place elsewhere, right?
No, we absolutely see that the advancements continue in what we spend and the research we do around the silicon, around looking at how do you design and get down to the perspective around chips and continue to drive the performance there. We see in the networking market, it continues to push the envelope. One of the important parts now is that we see the need not just to invest in faster, better, cheaper chips, lower energy, et cetera. It comes down to it's far more of a software problem. We have to change the way we think about the problems in order to get the benefit out of it. A great example is if I sit here and I throw a ball out into the room and somebody catches it. That construct, a human brain can handle and not even think about all the different aspects and variables that come into play in that ball flying through the air and somebody reaching up and catching it. For a computer to do that, we need to think about it differently without filling up rooms and rooms and rooms with compute power. And then they'd still only be able to handle one use case, one device, one arc, one speed.
John, what's your take on, getting back to the original ideas, who's making who's doing the big R&D these days for telecom?
Well, just briefly on the prior question, I would say that with a Pro Bowl here in town, Joe's analogy about catching the ball is particularly apt. But I think I don't see the infrastructure players as really investing a lot in R&D other than incremental advances in power and cooling technologies and modular data centers. And as it pertains to the big telcos, I think they're leveraging the advances made by the Junipers and the Ciscos and the Alcatel-Lucents and so forth. So they're purchasers rather than they're purchasers of innovation and off-the-shelf products rather than really driving the envelope.
But we think that sounds like we're then talking about a lot more companies as well now. It's not just so the spin-offs from the PTTs, the Bell Labs, which spins into Alcatel-Lucent, so to speak. Now, it's not just Alcalu, Ericsson, but you're also saying that Cisco's and Junipers are entering into it, and a lot of the companies that are here sponsoring at PTC and present are also doing innovation. So it's distributed a lot more.
Absolutely. So it could be applications that are riding principally on mobile networks that create a stickier customer experience.
It's no different than what we see. What the communication networks, what the internet and mobile has offered to businesses, other industries where barriers of entry have fundamentally fallen. I think relative to development, barriers of entries have fallen around different aspects of the market because it's software that's not as capital intensive.
Right.
One thing though that we do see is that there is, and I think will continue to be, a lot of investment around nanotechnologies, a lot of around exascale technology, scaling not just up and out, but in relative to that market, and the need therefore to have a very capital-intensive model kind of shifts away. It's like you look at a foundry today. A foundry is enormously expensive. Mm-hmm. You have to have enormous scale. So what happens is companies come together to build those foundries so that they can take advantage of the scale. When you look at, from a design perspective, you don't have to have nearly the capital investment that's required.
And the reason I ask about R&D first is because among the types of investments, this is kind of the invisible investment that's taking place in a company's investing in itself and in the future development of technologies. So in Joe, in your presentation, you talked about the kind of the investments I see the most, which are VC things. So let's flip over to kind of the Wall Street question and say, what is smart money looking at right now? What are investors who maybe aren't even telecom people but coming to you for advice and stuff? What are they ended up saying? Yeah, that's an area I want to put my money into.
I think at a broad level, to the extent that a portfolio manager has time in the day to think about individual companies, much less sectors, they're all generalists, but what they read about every day and what they tangibly perceive in their day-to-day life, smartphone usage, tablet usage, their kids, families, relatives, and so forth, how do I play the growth in data? And so, initially you think about the carriers, you think about the folks that provide the pipes, the folks that provide the endpoints of the pipes, the folks that are making the equipment that goes at those endpoints and on towers. Mm-hmm. So that kind of gravitates them towards a lot of the sectors that are represented here at the conference.
Very broad then, still.
Yeah. So
you mentioned towers just in passing there. Let me ask you, how is the tower sector? Because it was really hot for a while, carriers were selling their tower assets into tower owners like American Tower in the U.S. as a consolidated this real estate asset essentially, and that was a hot space for a bit. Is it still hot, or is it shifting away?
I'd say it sports the highest multiple, even higher than the data center group. Even though the growth organically is maybe 7-8% same store growth per year, but the asset expansion is definitely happening, and so there's two flavors in which that's taking place. One is through heavy emphasis on distributed antenna systems and small cell architectures. Crown Castle's a company that's really kind of placing its bet there. And then American Tower and SBA, the two other listed companies, are expanding overseas. And so Brazil, India, Africa, places where there's not just necessarily mobile usage growth, but what I tend to look at is 3G penetration. 4G doesn't exist in a lot of the world, so it's really 3G penetration being only in the low 20% range in a place like Brazil, a lot of growth left, and then when 4G happens, that'll just provide extra growth. And so the carriers are, in many of these geographies, they still own the infrastructure. They're looking to sell it as a way to generate some cash, and they'll find many buyers amongst either existing tower operators or others that want to enter the sector.
Mm-hmm. So one of the perennial solid investments anybody could make would be to buy spectrum rights. And there's always when a company takes part in an auction and wins the rights to a spectrum, there's often speculation whether if it's a new entrant, do they ever actually intend to deploy, or do they just want to find a way to sit on this spectrum until they can later resell it at a pretty good profit? And there's Next Wave is an example of a company in the U.S. that sat on a lot of spectrum for a while, eventually can resell it. The cable operators in the United States were potentially going to be cellular operators, ended up selling the spectrum largely to Verizon. So whether that's a deliberate investment strategy or they wanted to be but chose not to in the end, is spectrum still a solid investment? I mean, because it's paid off for everybody who bought it and then sold it later on so far.
Well, I think that if you go back and look at sort of some of the spectrums, is particularly in probably the initial 3G spectrum auctions in Europe, really kind of hobbled the operators. They didn't have the ability to deploy. So not everybody benefited to the degree. Now, if you look at it today and say, where is it positioned today? Yes, they're very well positioned because of the spectrum they owned. But did it actually generate the rate return on the capital that was deployed is another question. And you always have to look at, well, what was the alternate use of that capital? Could I have gotten a better return?
But the UK spectrum auction was definitely an outlier globally.
So in the U.S., and you talk about people who sit on it, well, certain regulatory bodies say, if you don't build out next time, you lose the rights to it. That's one thing. So they're getting more at it. It will have value as long as governments view that that auctioning off spectrums is a good way to raise money. Right? So if you look at it from that perspective, it is driven by the regulatory market. If the regulatory market or policy shifts in a given market, then that investment can become very tenuous.
So, I thanks for the answer.
If you own spectrum in the right band, it's incredibly useful from a mobile usage standpoint. I was a skeptic that Clearwire had a particularly valuable asset in the mid 2 gigahertz range, and I don't think anybody saw SoftBank coming in and seeing value there where nobody in the U.S. really, other carriers, Clearwire tried to sell that asset to other carriers. Nobody was interested, but you had SoftBank, which had experience operating the very same flavor of WiMAX that Clearwire had operated at, and was going after the same flavor of LTE, and had experience in that spectrum band, knew how to deploy a network in its domestic market, and is evidently going to try that here in the U.S.
So that's twice kind of you brought up the SoftBank Spring, and you talked about some other international activity, and we see AT&T is currently rumored to be shopping for some kind of a purchase in Europe that they could use to broaden diversify their ownings as well, rumored to be KPN in the Netherlands. But this tendency to make these larger players to make investments abroad, is that a trend we're going to see a lot more of?
Well, if you look at from the perspective of we need to drive growth, our shareholders, so you have to look at who owns and what is the model in which the network operator sits. It really kind of will push that. Going international is a very good path for finding new markets, new growth. I mean, if we look at it as always, you have a couple of choices. Either you expand who you serve or you expand what you deliver. And most of the operators are looking at, domestically we're looking at how do we expand what we serve or who we serve from that perspective, not who we serve, but what we deliver to them. And then when they look outside of that box, they go international. International is still and has historically generated inconsistent or not a definite return. You look at all the players in the U.S. had extensive international holdings in the 90s and all got out of them. Right? And now they're going back because the growth in the U.S. is going to plateau, and they need to find a different place.
Isn't it odd then, though, that SoftBank is making that investment in another developed nation, and AT&T is making an investment in a highly developed nation as well, that they're not going to some greenfield where they can really see a lot of growth?
Well, I think it drives to what is their competency, one, and two is what business model do they operate under? What is the expectation of their shareholders? Yes. And how does that play from that perspective? Is it, can AT&T, or let's take it out from AT&T, but can an established player who has a very mature business model and a very defined set of expectations by their shareholders take off and shift and say, we're going to go after something else. We're going to go after a land grab as opposed to a revenue.
It's back to Tim's map originally this morning where he showed where Eritrea basically has no, is AT&T going to bring a lot of core competencies if they go buy spectrum in Eritrea? Right. Probably not an area where they can bring a lot to the table, right? So our audience here at the PTC is largely made up of people that are doing business deals in terms of interconnects, and they're talking about undersea cables and satellite transponders and the like. So I mean, I'm relatively distant from what kind of investments are taking place in those kind of infrastructure. You know, how many satellites are going up and things like that. But so I mean, I can talk Silicon Valley all day long, but it's tough for me to talk about that. Are you guys watching it all? What kind of thing, you know, these kind of core and these interconnects and these undersea cable? What's going on there?
I think undersea cable, there's recent technology developments that have kind of been able to extend the useful life of the assets. Improving the throughput, but they do have a limited life, and at some point there's going to be a replacement cycle. Satellites, much the same. Average satellite is designed to have a life of 15 to 20 years, and so what you find is it's a fixed cost model. They're basically free cash machines, but then every decade and a half they spend billions to refresh the constellation. Video, I'd say, is video and government usage are principal drivers of that investment.
You know, Bob's points about latency being so critical going forward. Does that make investments in satellites seem like, well, they might not have the payoff that was expected as latency becomes more and more important?
Well, you can go, but not all services have the same requirements. So there are certain locations where satellite is maybe the only viable option, and two, depending on the various different types of services that he laid out very clearly. I mean, you go, satellite can serve some basic services very well, but then as you go up, you need different types of infrastructure. And what we look at from that perspective is really we deploy our service delivery models, we have to be very concerned about what the bandwidth is and what the latency is. So we look at it from, okay, first is bandwidth, then there's latency, jitter, packet loss. All of those things come into consideration when you look at this. And then it causes you then to have a strategy on how do I deploy my infrastructure? Where do I deploy my infrastructure? And that's so from a very interested observer, we look and follow what and where capacity is deployed, but we're not an active participant in that market.
And to your first point, there's service diversity, so these satellite investments may not serve the role they were originally intended for, but video may shift towards the satellite, for broadcast use, and of course, all these Pacific Islands are good candidates for satellite connections.
When you get your cable signal at home, it goes over satellite, and so it plays a key role for terrestrial video, and then maritime, aeronautical, and government usage. You're not going to find cable to cruise ships or jetliners anytime soon. So there is a big market there, and expectations when you're on the open seas and in an aircraft for broadband are increasing. So,
and with both of the just previous presentations, when you talk, the United States is not monolithic relative to the availability of broadband, wireless or fixed. And as you look at that, it's just, there needs to be coverage. If the policy of the government is universal coverage, you have to reach everywhere. That puts challenges. And you can look around the world. Everywhere is like that. China has a characteristic, so the eastern seaboard is very different than the west.
Yeah, and everywhere is such a massively different challenge than most places. Like cover 80% of the population, that's a very achievable goal, but cover 100% is a whole different ballgame in terms of cost per person served. John, you mentioned you started going towards the direction of when we shifted to satellites and undersea cables, of opportunity to extend the usable lifetime of these and actually extract a lot more revenue from the investment. So are you seeing that happening very often, where a satellite that's put up with an expected lifespan of 15 years, undersea cable with expected value of 30 years is being, hey, by layering on some kind of wave division multiplexing, we can get X throughput more than we expected and further the life cycle?
Easier to do with undersea cable, very difficult to do with satellites.
Right.
So you have to just develop a smarter app or a better user interface to get through or get past the latency and throughput limitations.
It's pretty difficult to upgrade the hardware on a satellite ultimately, though, right? It's short of a spacewalk. Well, for maybe Elon Musk's SpaceX, we can get commercial service and go up and play with our satellites. But until then, I'm interested too in what areas we think are, globally speaking, are the hottest in terms of telecommunications investments. And I've seen some maps showing the BRIC countries really hot. Is it the countries that were deficient in Tim's original maps that he put up? Is that where the investment is going?
Well, if you look at the investment, in certain markets, the investment will be part, again, of kind of the government policy of trying to drive growth, trying to attract more capital. You need higher, more advanced networks. When you look at it from the ability to drive the economic growth in quality of life or societal services, there will be investments there. The scale of the investments are different. And when you look at some of the growth markets, they don't have the legacy, so they don't have to deal with that end of the investment and the kind of renewal. So you'll see lower levels of investment, but it doesn't mean the capability that's being deployed is any less than what you'd see in mature markets.
So I think we have a couple of minutes. I'm willing to take a question or two from the audience, so I don't know if there's a microphone available. There is the back. So if you'd like to raise your hand, we can potentially take a question. I'll shift it back to our home field, to Joe, and talk about the kind of investments that are taking place in Silicon Valley. And repeat, a lot of things, like you mentioned, smart cities, I think is one of your options. And one of the things that I find interesting is that these things don't need to get looked at as silos. Like smart cities, when you say that is an area that's hot for investment. I think Cisco is active in it, among others, and a bunch of companies. But that is M2M, and that is cloud. So these things all interact. Like these investments, an area gets hot, not by being a hot silo, but by being tied into a bunch of other hot areas.
Well, you asked about the smart money on Wall Street. Well, the smart money Wall Street is have you aligned your business model and what your expectations are with the returns that you're generating? How are you deploying that capital? Will it come back in a very predictable way? When you talk about the hot money is more on what is the promise. We're not looking for a direct return right now on this. We're looking to establish the foothold, to find some sort of exit if you're a venture firm, and as you kind of pound through that. So if you look at the fact that where will the money be made in M2M? Well, we know that for the most part, machine-to-machine solutions take on sort of an industry-specific perspective. Yeah. And even within smarter cities, there are sort of verticals in there, whether it be transportation, public safety, utilities, et cetera. So it is one that you can get after and kind of drive towards. It makes sense. One of the nice things about cities is their objectives are very clear. They don't vary much. You want to attract investment to drive economic growth, to improve the quality of life of your constituency, and do it as cheap as possible.
So let me tie those together in the way I was thinking. So if smart city, well, that uses machine-to-machine, a bunch of sensors placed all over the city, some input, some output, like controlling streetlights. You're going to gather phenomenal amounts of data from all these sensors and things. You're going to need big data and cloud services to host them. You're going to need a data center. You're going to run analytics on top of that and pull out a whole lot of information. So we might, we talked about every one of these, not today in this panel, but throughout this event, talk about every one of these things. Analytics is hot, but you see that all these hot things are actually part of the whole cauldron that's really coming together.
You have to get that whole model, which makes sense to everybody, but then when you get to the point of saying who's going to make money at it, you got to look at always look at what problem you're trying to solve, and if you can really understand the problem you're trying to solve, you'll probably be able to make money at it. And what we see is a lot of these things, there is no problem.
Yes. So we got one question we can take, and then we'll wrap up.
Actually, the question is interesting, but even more interesting than the question is how it arose, which is, Joe, I took a photo of your slide, tweeted it, got a response back. It's tweeted it over Wi-Fi, got a response back over Twitter, and I'm using a wireless mic to ask you the question. But basically, so that's sort of a hybrid multi-mode network architecture. But the question from Twitter is, the slide that you had showing the ratio of global IT spend to GDP growth, is there a comparable slide for telco or communications industry spend, or is that incorporated in the numbers?
What we see is that's specifically to what's defined as the IT world. When we expand it out to the ICT world, it doesn't change much. And what you would see is that there historically was an aspect, a growth in the communications market that was greater than GDP growth in a given market, which would lead you to believe that over time, the percent of spend was growing faster or increasing as a percent of GDP. And we see that reverse sort of towards the beginning of the millennium. And it will continue, and it will flatten out as well. And when you look at it and say, well, what about all the wireless markets that we've seen grow and sort of spike up? And that is very consistent with it, because other aspects of the market have declined, And now what we're seeing is once you hit that plateau, that peak, it will slowly slide down. And we see once you've hit the penetration rates, once you start to bring in appropriate levels of competition, you see the cost per whatever the measure you want to take is decline, and it gets to be very much along the model of what we see with, say, the server or the network or the storage market is you have to produce more and more every year, sell more and more every year just to remain flat. And that's what we're seeing in, you have to deliver more and more megabits, more and more voice minutes, more and more whatever you want to measure every year to remain flat. So then the question is where do you go from there? And you have to look at the slices within the industry to see where the opportunities for growth are. And that's what we spend a tremendous amount of time, is always looking at what are the slices. We've talked about them. We've talked about mobile. We've talked about the impact of social, cloud computing, analytics. Software-defined networks is a real hot area right now within the operator community because of the promise that it says we can get, in effect, we can get more capacity for less cost. We can get higher quality for less cost, and it drives down that side of the equation as their traffic continues to skyrocket and their ability to charge for it is still constrained.
I think we gotta move towards wrapping up because I got the sign a couple of minutes ago. So I would like to thank both of you very much for participating. I think I see why they put you as the anchors here of the conference to hold everybody here until the very end. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
PTC'13 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC'13 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC'13 silver sponsors. Thank you for all of your support.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please welcome to the stage Professor Richard Taylor, President of PTC and Chairman of the Board.
Aloha, and welcome to the closing luncheon and award ceremony for PTC'13, the 35th annual PTC convention. We'll be doing a number of things. I'm here basically just to give you an initial welcome. And we'll be talking about some other things, but I would be remiss if I did not note the absence in person of two of our senior colleagues who are here in spirit but no longer with us in person, Dr. Meher Jasawala and Dr. Yael Braunstein, both good friends, great collaborators and colleagues professionally, and ardent supporters of PTC and particularly of the educational and research aspect of PTC. They both sadly passed away this last year. I think of that, and I think of this occasion as an opportunity to acknowledge their work and their passing, but really to celebrate them, because it was based on their work that we're here now doing this. Meher was a founder of PTC. Yael, along with his wife Betsy, made contributions at critical moments in the history of that aspect of PTC. And so I think if they could see us here, they would be very happy and satisfied and that we are able to honor their contributions in this way. So I think they would really enjoy seeing the awards that are being made, the Josawala Award, the Bronstein Award, to the outstanding work of scholars that continues the path that they have set out before us. So we look forward to continuing to do that. I just wanted to mention them under the circumstances and welcome you all once again. Thank you, enjoy your lunch, and we'll be back later. Thank you.
And now please welcome Fedor Smith, President, Atlantic ACM.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming, and thank you to PTC for including our awards in this wonderful awards banquet. So Atlantic ACM is a research firm based in Boston, and we've been covering the telecom market since 1991. And one of the key things we found is that there's a real lack of information, particularly in the wholesale space, for customers and for providers. So in 1995, we started doing market-wide customer feedback to gather impartial feedback on the services and products that the wholesale providers are selling to the industry. In 2000, we added the Global Wholesale Report Card. So this study talks to thousands, sent out to thousands of wholesale customers, and several hundred of them provide several thousand customer reviews, and based on that, we put together the Best-in-Class Global Wholesale Awards. The categories that are involved in this are several key operational categories: sales reps, brand, provisioning, network performance, billing, and customer service. And then we have 2 product categories based on a variety of voice and data products. And the product awards are based not only on product quality, but also price competitiveness. This year, we had a total of 19 carriers who received enough reviews to be included individually in these awards. So in order to keep it fair, we decided to create 2 award categories this year. One for carriers who have a gross wireline revenue exceeding $15 billion, and another category for those who are $15 billion and under in their gross wireline. I'm going to invite Doug Barnett, our senior analyst, to come up and announce the award recipients.
Great, thank you, Fedor. So to start it off, we'll have, if I can get the clicker to work. There we go. Belgacom International Carrier Services, and to come up to accept the award, I welcome Brian Troche and Nicholas Nakruyan. And as they make their way up, they're accepting the award for voice value for mid-sized carriers, mid-sized and under voice value. So congratulations to them. And next, we'll welcome up to the stage Intelliquent for midsize and under carrier, getting multiple awards here. David Stolaric to accept on behalf. And they won for sales reps, provisioning, network performance, billing, customer service, and data value. So welcome, David. And the last provider in the midsize and under category is TeleSonera. We welcome Brendan Ives up to the stage to accept the award for best-in-class brand for midsize and under carriers. Congratulations. And that's reputation for quality. So congrats. So with that, we'll shift gears to the large carriers. So these are those carriers with $15 billion or more in annual wireline revenue. And first up is Deutsche Telekom International Carrier Sales and Solutions. And for that, we welcome Holger Magnussen up to the stage. And he's accepting the award for brand, provisioning, network, and customer service. So congratulations. With that, we'll go on to the next provider, Orange, and I welcome Isabelle Lorraine de Roer up to the stage, and she's accepting the award for billing and voice value. And then last but certainly not least, Telecom Italia Sparkle, and I ask Pasquale Fiorillo up to the stage, accepting the Sales Reps and Data Value Award for large wholesale providers. So congratulations to all our award winners. There's 6 of them, collecting quite a large number of awards.
Please welcome back Professor Richard Taylor, President and Chairman of the Board of PTC.
It is my pleasure to be involved in the awards given by the Intelligent Community Forum. Last summer, I was in New York last June and represented PTC at the award ceremony when Riverside, California was named the Intelligent Community of the Year from out of 400 global communities that were competing. And I believe we have a scene from the award ceremony at the Steiner Film Studios in Brooklyn. Do we have that? When Mayor Loveridge received the news.
For the first time in 5 years, the Intelligent Community of the Year Award will come back to North America. For the first time in 10 years, it will come to the United States. California Dreaming, Riverside, California.
On June 8th of last year, ICF named the American city of Riverside, California as the Intelligent Community of the Year and added its name to the growing list of the world's most intelligent places. Just 1 month later, the search began for the next Intelligent Community of the Year, the community that will serve as the global model for success in 2013. Today, we named the top 7 intelligent communities, the finalists for the 2013 Intelligent Community of the Year Award. ICF's award program is about far more than picking a winner. Through these awards, ICF collects information on how the world's leading communities succeed in the 21st century, using every tool from broadband and education to innovation and digital inclusion. We share these best practices with other communities. Our motive is simple. We want to re-energize communities. We want to help them develop more prosperous economies, solve decades-old social problems, and revive and enrich their cultures. We want to help them capture the vast rewards of our century's global markets. In October, we named the Smart 21 Communities of the Year. Since then, these 21 have completed detailed questionnaires on their challenges and accomplishments. An international team of academic analysts has reviewed their information and narrowed the list of 21 to just 7. The 7 best examples of economic, social, and cultural development using information and communications technologies. ICF is pleased and honored to announce the top 7 intelligent communities of 2013.
The mayor of the recipient community and called his team up to the stage, and they all stood there sort of sending out tweets and texts from the stage to sort of celebrate their achievement and, again, reflecting the strength and spontaneousness of social media. Riverside at the community at the end of the 19th century was among the richest communities in the United States. It was sometimes called America's wealthiest city. had come back from the near dead and using a telecom strategy and a collective will to seize its destiny. And its story is chronicled in a new book, Seizing Our Destiny, which our next speaker helped to write. Today, we begin the second phase of choosing Riverside's successor, and PTC is pleased to again host the annual announcement of the world's top 7 intelligent communities of the world for 2013. These 7 are chosen by a global team of academic colleagues on behalf of the Intelligent Community Forum, which, as many of you know, is an international think tank which studies the impact of ICT and broadband on economic and social development. Its work was recognized by its invitation to speak at last month's Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo. The ICF's top 7 list provides a model of economic and social development. These communities demonstrate the capacity to collaborate, which may be their distinguishing feature. This year's top 7 power entrepreneurial growth, address social challenges, and preserve and promote local culture. But only one will be named the Intelligent Community of the Year at ICF's annual summit in New York this June, and PTC members are invited to attend, and registration fees will be waived for them. Thank you, Lou. Also, if you're interested in being a judge for the awards, please ask to talk to our next speaker, and it's my pleasure now to introduce him. He's a familiar face at PTC through his work with the satellite industry. Let me introduce Lou Zaccarella, co-founder of ICF and the ICF Foundation, who will announce this year's top 7 selection. Lou? Please welcome Lou Zaccarella. Thanks, Scott.
Aloha. Thank you, Richard, and thank you again to PTC for enabling us to come here and to name the world's re-energized and re-emerging communities, the top 7. I just wanted to summarize for those of you. Todd, can we advance it? Yeah. What we've been up to in the last 12 months since we saw you here. We launched our first institute in North America, so we'll be studying intelligent communities from our own school. Now, I'm a guy who barely, got C grades, but I have an institute on a college campus in Ohio, so go figure that out. Anything's possible in America. But it is a go-to place for any community in the Midwest of the United States to go and to learn how to use telecommunications to transform their community. So we're very, very proud of that. We also, as Richard mentioned, published our book, Seizing Our Destiny. It is the story of Riverside, California, and 6 other communities that came back from the dead. And we encourage you to take a look at that. Richard mentioned that on behalf of the International Intelligent Community Movement and all of you in the telecommunications business, we represented you at the Nobel Prize last month in Oslo, where I was asked to speak about telecommunications and freer and more open societies, and it was a great honor and thrill for all of us. We also launched a final initiative, which was the Rural and Remote Program, Project Brain Gain, where we are going to eliminate the middle of nowhere, and we are going to make hometowns safe, profitable, and socially purposeful for any community on Earth. So we're very excited about that. So thank you for letting me do my report here. Todd, if you want to advance it for me. How do communities get on this top 7 list? Everybody asks us that question. And here's how they do it, if anybody has a community that's interested. Todd? We base it on 6 criteria. You can see the 5 permanent criteria here. One is we look at your broadband access. We look at your knowledge workforce. We look at innovation in your local government. And believe it or not, at the local level, governments actually work today. You have very, very collaborative councils and very, very enlightened mayors and city councilors and people in the academic sector who are really getting the job done. Will Rogers once said, if you think life moves too fast, go to the post office. But if you want to have hope again in politics, go to the intelligent communities and listen to their leaders. We look at digital inclusion. How well are you bringing everybody in the society, in the community along? Are you connecting to educational networks? Are you connecting to telecommunications and healthcare networks? And are you bringing the least among us along? We study that. And then finally, we looked at how well you tell your story to both the rest of the world and yourselves. Finally, we add a sixth theme each year, which we study. This year, it's innovation and employment. We're going to look at innovation as a job creator for the 21st century and what its impact is. So if you fulfill those 6 criteria and you achieve at a very high level, you make our list of 21, and then if you're really, really good, you move on to the Super Bowl of the top 7. Todd? I won't take you through the selection process. It's rather cumbersome. It's a 10-month program. No bathing suits allowed in the competition. But if we did it here, I guess we could. But the important part, and I want to do a shout out to the quantitative analysis that's conducted by an academic on every continent. We have 5 of them. Their pictures are there, and they do the real hard work of looking at the data from the 21 communities and telling us on Monday who the top 7 are. So I wanted to thank Professors Albert Flournoy, Tomoko Kanawaner, Professor Chowell, and also our friend Mr. Tamayoko from Japan, or from Africa. Okay, let's get down to the business here. Who are the 21? Who are the 21 communities who among the 400 or so who submitted nominations made it to the list? And here they are. If you live in any one of them, congratulations. If you don't, you might think about moving or making your community one of those 21 someday. I would like you to applaud them because people are listening back home. So these are the 21. Most intelligent places. Okay, as you can see, some of them are not known. They are in other places of the world that you wouldn't think would be intelligent communities. Thank you. Including Albania, where we had our first intelligent community. Now we're going to go to 7. We didn't have a Pahu here this year or sound effects, so I'm going to ask you, unfortunately, to just put your fork down for a second and give us a little drum roll. So here we go, the top 7. I wondered how long you could keep that up. That's fantastic. Thank you. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the top 7 intelligent communities of 2013 are Columbus, Ohio, United States. They have reversed 3 decades of brain drain, and for the first time in 3 decades, have more people moving into Columbus than not. They've created 29,000 jobs in the last 2 years through collaboration with Ohio State University, through a new incubator, and through a dedicated broadband ecosystem that reaches out through the region. So congratulations to Columbus, Ohio. Number 2, Oulu, Finland returns to the list. This former industrial city, about 200 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, built a tech-based economy around a Nokia research center. Unfortunately, Nokia had a few problems, but they had built for themselves a strategy called the Nokia Risk, and as a result, they were ready. When Nokia went down, Oulu remained intelligent. They've created 18,000 new high-tech jobs, and they have a decades-old culture of collaboration. So we congratulate Oulu, Finland, for their return to the list of top 7. Number 3, we're going to Canada. We're actually going to go to Justin Bieber's hometown, Stratford, Ontario. True, 32,000 people and a lot of 14-year-old girls who visit. At the turn of the century, Stratford had a reputation for being quaint, cultured, and out of the way. It doesn't have that problem anymore. As a result of what it has done with its Wi-Fi and broadband network, its International Shakespeare Festival, which it has hooked up to its digital media messaging, It now is building a reputation and attracts foodies, cyclists, and other target groups throughout the year. The city of 32,000 generates $139 million in revenue, Canadian dollars, each year because of what it has done with its broadband network hooked up to its culture. So we congratulate Stratford for its return to the top 7. Must be a Canadian out there clapping. Number 4, we're going to go to Asia and Taichung City, Taiwan. This is another community that returns to our list from last year. It has a range of different economies, a major seaport where 70% of employees work in services, a rural economy, and it is a very, very diverse mix of services. The backbone of Taiwan's manufacturing economy, it has a network of 1,500 precision machinery makers and tens of thousands small to medium-sized business suppliers. Its small companies now benefit from a shared cloud-based ERP system that reduces their purchasing costs and time to market. Taichung has become such a cool place as a result of becoming an intelligent community that last year Lady Gaga went there to sing. Congratulations to Taichung. Who's next? We're going to go to Europe. As a matter of fact, we're going to go to Estonia. Tallinn, Estonia. When the financial crisis came, it hit Estonia and its principal city very, very hard. Yet beneath it all, Tallinn had built a foundation based on information technology and education, and has been able to withstand one of the worst crises to ever hit Europe in the modern era. Its return to growth has a sustainable basis in what? In education and entrepreneurship. 23 universities and technical schools. It has the resources to build a knowledge workforce, and it has. And it continues to expand those skills. Tallinn, I'll give you a little anecdote, has more lawyers per square foot than any other city in the world. And that had to be a lawyer's parent clapping. But congratulations to Tallinn, Estonia. A very, very smart place. Number 6, Taoyuan County, Taiwan. We've got 2 from Taiwan, I'm sorry. Taoyuan County is, of course, another city of about 2.8 million. And it's an industrial powerhouse with more than 24 industrial parks, 44,000 companies, and 10,000 factories. It has the youngest population in Taiwan, and interestingly, it has an e-learning portal that attempts to provide every resident with customized learning. Congratulations to Taoyuan. And finally, number 7, we're going to go back to North America. Toronto, Canada, as they call it, where I live, New York City with manners. It is a great place, Canada's largest city and financial capital. It is challenged, however, to maintain its edge. It is the nation's most expensive city and is experiencing a very, very significant immigration-driven population surge, but it is handling it. It is building the largest waterfront redevelopment project in North America. 40,000 residential units. It will be served by a 1 gigabit fiber-to-the-home network, which integrates green technologies and practices into every aspect of its design. It is going to be the engine for Toronto to sustain its economic growth. Toronto also has a gaming and fashion incubator there to give you a sense of how important those industries are and how important telecom is to them. So Toronto is our 7th community. We go from 21 to 7, and you can applaud them. They will each be in New York, and you can spend 2 or 3 days learning from them, and we certainly encourage you to do that, June 5th through 7th. If you come and attend as a PTC member, your registration will be waived, and you can participate in this global dialogue to make our cities better. So again, I want to thank Sharon and the PTC for all that they've done to give our movement visibility and to rebuild places for the 21st century. Thanks a lot. Have a good year.
Please welcome Dr. Elizabeth Fife and Mark Chun, co-chairs of the Research Committee.
Hi there. I'm Elizabeth Fife, the co-chair of the Research Committee, and I'm going to introduce the paper prize winners for this year's PTC 2012 from the research community of PTC, as well as our young scholars. This is a new program we have inaugurated this year. It was quite competitive, and we selected 7 individuals, both PhDs, postdocs, to attend PTC, learn about PTC, become involved. Hopefully this will, the idea is to help the future of PTC research by bringing in the best and brightest of the new scholars that are in the Asia-Pacific region. But first of all, we'll start off with the Student Paper Prize, and I'd like to introduce Alex Bronstein, the son of Yale Bronstein, who is the longtime supporter and founder of the Student Prize for the best research paper, Student Prize paper. So, Alex, if you'd like to come up and introduce the winner of this year.
My dad loved the community here at PTC and believes strongly in the research and education mission of the organization, and as well as the value of student work. In that spirit, I'm pleased to award this year's Bronstein Prize to a deserving recipient, Nami Yonatani, for her paper on the role of cable TV operators as a facilities-based competitor in the local broadband market in Japan.
Dr. Jayakar, would you like to come up? Yeah. Okay, next, I'm pleased to introduce the winner of this year's Mihiro Jizuwala Award for the best overall research paper this year. And the winner is Professor Krishna Jayakar from Penn State, part of the Penn State juggernaut here. The title of his paper was a Broadband Bridge for the Disability Divide, What Works and What Does Not. And this paper actually comes out of a PTC-sponsored research project on this same topic. So I'd like to congratulate Dr. Jayakar for his excellent paper. Could the young scholars out there, could you guys come up, get your certificates? Young scholars. There you are. So, like I said, the Young Scholar Program, the idea is to just further scholarship and PTC's role in the future of research in telecom. And we selected 7 pretty exceptional people this year. Not all of them are here, unfortunately, just due to school schedules. So At PTC, though, however, they presented their research. They had duties as sort of academic journalists. They went around to a lot of the panels and wrote up synopses, which you can find on the PTC website, along with their papers. And the award papers, of course, too, are also on the PTC website and will be available. So I suggest, if you have time, to take a look. First of all, I'll read out the names of the people who aren't here right now. So the first is Ibrahim Roman. So he's a postdoc from Chalmers University of Technology. His area of concentration was ICT for development. The second young scholar, who's not present right now, Joe Clark, who's also a postdoc from University of Nebraska at Omaha, and his area of concentration is information systems. And Satish Krishnan is our next. He's a PhD student from the National University of Singapore. ICT for development is his area. And let's see, Guangzhe Jung, a postdoc also from Singapore Management University. Technology, disruption, and telecom is his area. So these are the guys that aren't here, but the people we have a few who remain. First of all, we have Zhuyang Li. His specialty is telecommunications policy, and she's from Penn State. Here. Yay. Next, Arzu Atik, PhD student from the University of Auckland in New Zealand, and her area is information systems. And finally, Sangyup Lee, PhD from Michigan State University. And his area of concentration is media and information economics. So congratulations, guys. Great job. Yay. Oh, you didn't get the first.
Next, please welcome Greg Daffner, Vice Chair of the Awards Committee.
Aloha! That was pretty good, pretty good. Okay, so we have now come to the final award. And I would say the one that we've all been waiting for, but I think all of the awards were of interest to us. This one is the Richard J. Barber Distinguished Service Award. It was established by PTC a few years ago to recognize the value of a member, staff person, or volunteer who has provided exceptional service to PTC over an extended period of time. The award is named after Richard Barber. Dick was our founding executive director and was, before we named the award, was its first recipient. The committee that makes this determination, which is ultimately vetted to the Board of Governors of PTC, consists of 3 people, and I'd like to acknowledge them. Bruce Drake, who could not be here today, so that's why I am the substitute. Heather Hudson, who is here, sitting over here, and myself. And just to do a line from Lou's presentation, how do you get this award? How does the process work? Basically, nominations are open to really anyone who's given service over the years to PTC, and any of our members can step forward and make recommendations for next year's award winner. And I would entreat you today to start thinking about it. We accept nominations really starting today. You can wait. You don't have to do it right away. You've got time. And then next January, at the conclusion of PTC, at an awards luncheon very much like this, probably with chicken that is very similar to what we had today, will be served along with the award. And I would like to ask two of my colleagues, the president of PTC, Richard Taylor, who's been speaking to you all afternoon and throughout the week, and our CEO, Sharon Nakama, to please come on up here and give me a hand in making this award announcement. Okay. Before we have the drum roll, I want to tell you that this year, and it's actually a kind of exciting process. So the group of this little committee, the three of us, we get together, we examine the nominations, we take a look at the records, and then we make very hard decisions as to who is more worthy of getting the award. It's entirely possible to nominate the same person more than once, so if you don't succeed the first time. In this case, it was our pleasure to do something a little different. We decided to kind of split the award between an individual and a group that individual works with and represents. And for those of you that don't know it, drum roll, please. The award, which is a beautiful salad bowl. Oh, I'm sorry. What is it? Ah, okay. So it's more than just a salad bowl, but it is functional as well. And maybe it's a desecration to use it for salad, so forget that idea. Maria Koyama, who's been a long-term member of PTC, is the award winner this year, along with PTC Japan, which has been one of our biggest supporters from the inception of the organization, and continues to be a real boost to maintaining our participation in Japan and throughout the region. And so it's our honor to give it to both of them. Koyama-san could not be here today to receive it in person. So instead, on his behalf, Yamakawa-san will step up to the podium to receive the award. And we'd also like to have the entirety of PTCJ come on up here to take a bow and a picture with us. Thank you very much. Mahalo.
Cloud services present some interesting and unique challenges to both cloud and network service providers. Today, the vast majority of cloud workloads are delivered over the public internet, and while that's appropriate for certain types of work, such as test and dev, it does not meet the security or the performance requirements for most corporate IT users. On the network side, it also tends to be the lowest margin product that a network delivers. In order to deliver the sorts of security and performance requirements that they need, what you need to do is attach the private WAN environment to the public or private cloud environment sitting in the data center. This has a dual benefit. It meets the corporate requirements as well as allowing the network service provider to sell a higher margin product. To that end, what we've seen are private NNIs being set up between network service providers, both parties joining things such as our Ethernet exchange in order to efficiently aggregate access to one another, as well as joining our Internet exchange in order to have access to the optimal Internet routes for those workloads appropriate for the Internet environment.
PTC'13 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC'13 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC'13 bronze sponsors. Thank you for all of your support.
As a wholesale telecom carrier, you need to keep a tight control on costs without ever sacrificing quality. Introducing RimHub, the best partner to outsource your wholesale carrier functions with guaranteed cost savings and better customer experience. RimHub is guided by K. Paul Singh, co-founder, ex-chairman, and CEO of Primus Telecom, who built a profitable global wholesale business at Primus. RimHub's best-in-class service portfolio includes managed network provisioning, and cost of sales management. Our NOC, staffed with IP and TDM engineers, monitors and troubleshoots network issues for global carriers. Our network specialists are experts in provisioning voice and data circuits for carriers. Our telco auditors ensure you pay only for what you contracted. So why use RimHub? Achieve material cost savings, enhance operational flexibility, deliver a better customer experience. Contact us for a no-obligation assessment today, plus win an iPad mini.
Thank you for joining us at PTC 13. We hope you enjoyed the conference. If you missed any of the PTC TV programming, please visit the PTC website at ptc.org. We look forward to welcoming you back to Honolulu for PTC 14 from the 19th through the 22nd of January 2014. Aloha.